At this point, Chris is overwhelmed by guilt because not only was he experiencing this thing, he felt as though he had unleashed it now on his friends ever since the prayer had happened. He was tortured and murdered near Torture Tree, which is around 1 mile away from his campus. And this tree is the one where Chris crossed this tree regularly whenever he went running. So it was a tree that he crossed every time he went running. And this tree is responsible for all the experiences that he's been having so far. As Matt is fixing the house around, he begins to realize that everything in the house is either rotten or needs to be replaced. Matt was beginning to feel like this house is against him. He would finish repairs on one thing and then he would discover that there is great repairs left with another thing. So it was this never-ending chain of work which was soaking in all of his money and savings. She says that she got out of the car and she saw that every single light in the house was on. So she gets concerned because at 5:30 a.m. to have the whole house, the lights on, she goes in concerned thinking what has happened. And she notices that her mother is sitting outside Shane's bedroom. The mattress has been dragged outside of the room and Shane is sleeping on the mattress right next to her mother. And her mother is looking very concerned and she's sitting near her grandson taking care of him. Hello and welcome all. In this video, I am reviewing Netflix's True Haunting. True Hauntings is a 5-episode series. Episodes 1, 2, and 3 feature Eerie Hall, Part 1, 2, and 3. Episodes 4 and 5 feature This House Murdered Me, Part 1 and Part 2. Spoiler alert, this review contains spoilers. Now, if you do not want to know what goes on in the story at all, then skip to this timestamp and go straight to the review. For the rest of you, I am going to give you a detailed breakdown of the plot itself. Eerie Hall is directed by Neil Rawls and covers the duration of September 1984 to December 1985. This story features Chris DiCesare, his father Vito DiCesare, his friends in college Craig Norris, Linda Kalasinski, and Jeff Ungar. We are also introduced to one of his dorm roommates, Paul. We do not know his surname. Maybe he wanted to keep it private. These so far are the main players that we get to introduce throughout the narrative. In the way that Chris is depicted in the storytelling, we are told over and over again how much of a sincere bloke Chris really is. We are told that he got into this college on a scholarship. So he is very disciplined, he's hardworking, he's honest, he's duty-bound, he feels loyalty towards his friends, he feels the need to gain the approval of his father. So overall, we are told that Chris is a very sincere, decent guy. That is echoed throughout the story at different points. The story opens on 3rd September 1984 when he starts his first day of college. When he first moves into college, he has a roommate in the dorm. His name is Paul. Apart from his roommate Paul, he becomes very good friends with Jeff Ungar and later on Craig Norris. Other people that appear throughout the story are Beth, we do not know her surname, and Linda Kalasinski. Linda does appear in the series, giving voice to her own experiences. We also see Jeff and Craig speaking for themselves. We meet Chris's father, and much later into the narrative, quite a while later actually, we are introduced to Chris himself. Until that time, we only hear other people building the story around him. So the story itself opens by telling us about Chris, but we hear from Chris much later into the story. We don't get to see the real Beth. We don't get to see the real Paul. So these are the people whom we get to see throughout the 3 episodes. Chris starts his college at Geneseo on 3rd September 1984. His father drops him off, and from there on, we see how Chris bonds with his friends, and that he's a very decent guy. They make it a point to tell us that while other friends are jokesters, they play around, they're pranksters, and they do have light-hearted moments. Chris himself seems to be very, very sincere, not someone that people would play around with. He's not pranked on. He's not someone that people would unnecessarily trouble. He just keeps to himself, he does his work, and he goes about his day. As the story goes on, we realize that Chris starts to become more and more withdrawn and silent as time goes on. Now, the others around him assume that he is becoming withdrawn or silent because he's having adjustment issues. Since he comes from a small town, he never really moved around that much, and he never had to immerse himself in a completely new atmosphere. For example, his friend Craig Norris assumes that he is probably having adjustment issues since he's a small town boy and he's never been out away from his family. So now suddenly staying in college, perhaps he's not able to adapt to the changes that life has thrown his way. Likewise, Linda Kalasinski assumes that maybe he's dealing with mental health struggles, and because in the 80s there was stigma against mental health issues, perhaps he's keeping it to himself for fear of being shamed for having depression or some other issue. What was really ailing Chris, however, was he had started hearing voices, objects were moving around. He could hear noises, and these were completely unexplained. No one else around him was noticing it, it was just him. He kept hearing his name being called. Chris, Chris, Chris. And this came out as whispers when he was working, when he was running, or when he was doing other things in his life. All of a sudden, he would hear noises, strange bangings, or he would hear whispers, which no one else did. One night, Chris is working on his typewriter and he's alone in his room. As he's studying, he suddenly hears his name repeatedly being called out. He becomes uncomfortable and he looks around, but there is nothing. He continues working and he suddenly sees a dark, shadowy figure pop up out of nowhere into his room. He gets really, really freaked out. He runs out of the room screaming and heads straight to Jeff's room, which is right next to his own room. Jeff always carries a camera around. He's a shutterbug. So when he sees Chris running into his room all panicky and terrified and screaming, Jeff notes that he had never heard such a screaming before. It was blood-curdling scream that Chris ran out of his room with. So Jeff comforts him and he asks him what is the issue, and Chris says that there's someone in my room, they're standing there in my room. So Jeff then goes into Chris's room. He takes his camera. He's really terrified. So when he goes in, he goes with the camera poised to take photographs. And as he enters, he starts clicking. He takes, I think, 3 photographs of different angles of the room. But when he later on processes the photos, he doesn't see anything in the photos. And even in real life, when he notices the room around, there's nothing there. It's just an empty room. He comes back to Chris and he says that there is nothing in his room. Jeff is quite understanding. He's there for his friend. However, Chris feels embarrassed about this whole incident. So he doesn't want Jeff to share this with others. He requests him to keep this whole incident private. Jeff promises that he will not share this with anyone else. As these incidents are escalating with Chris, at some point, Ed and Lorraine Warren visit Geneseo and they give a lecture on the supernatural. At this lecture, Jeff goes along with Chris. Jeff is a keen enthusiast. He is a researcher, a learner. They show his real notes, where he has taken down notes from the lecture of the important points that they were making. One of the points that they make is that ghosts draw their energy from the living. Customarily, a door has to be opened. Those doors are opened either through the law of invitation or attraction. There is a type of person, because of their compassion or sympathetic nature, ghosts are attracted to. It's about people, their energy, their spirit. What you put out into the world, you get back from the world. At the end of the lecture, Lorraine and Ed are signing books. So Chris also joins the line of people who are interested to get their autographs or signatures. And there, Lorraine reacts a bit strangely. She looks at him and she refuses to shake hands with him. She says, no, I can't do this. And she tells her husband, Ed, that she doesn't want to be there anymore. This experience is extremely humiliating for Chris. He doesn't understand why he was rejected this way in front of everybody. This incident adds on to his feeling that something is wrong with him. We see a scene of him sitting around with Jeff and Craig, and he's wondering to his friends, what is wrong with me? Why are these things happening to me? Craig tells Chris that he has this energy of being open and honest, like a door that anyone could walk through. At this point, Chris begins to assume that maybe he's losing his mind. He starts questioning his own sanity. One night, Paul, his roommate, wakes up and he says that there is something down there because they have bunk beds. Because in their room, they have made an alteration where the lower part is where they have kept their study table and other things where there's space for them to sit around, and they built a bunk bed on top where the both of them can sleep. So he tells him there is something down there, just go and check it out. Chris tells him to just go back to sleep. Paul insists that he go out and check it out. That night, the entity that has been haunting Chris makes itself visible to Paul. Finally, Chris feels validated that he's not actually just losing his mind. This is something real, something external, not something that's going on within himself, because his friend has also witnessed the same thing that he has been seeing. Episode 2 opens on October the 20th, 1984. Around this time, we are told that Paul has vacated and silently moved out. There was no goodbye. There was nothing. There was no closure. One day, he just up and left. This was soon after the incident where he witnessed the entity along with Chris. Now, Chris finds himself stuck alone in this room because he cannot leave the college. He got into this college because of an athletic scholarship, and his father is immensely proud of him for having earned his way into college. And for him, his father's approval is extremely important. Because of this, he feels that he cannot just escape from this college because there are other realities that are keeping him anchored to the situation. So he resorts to sleeping in the common room and in other places wherever he can just go to sleep for the night rather than spending time alone in his own room. Because there are no other vacant rooms either that he can just shift to. This goes on for about like a month or so, and it begins to take a toll on his mental and physical health. Jeff, being the good friend that he is, wants to help Chris out. So he suggests that they invite contact with this entity so that they can understand what is going on here. Chris is reluctant to do so. He does not want to contact anything supernatural. But because he feels duty bound to Jeff as a friend, he wants to honor his suggestion. And as a result of this, he agrees. He says, fine, let's try to do this. That's where the famous photo of him with his hand outstretched comes from. So he calls out, he invites the entity, he says, come and tell me why are you here? Why is it that you're here? And nothing much happens for a while. Now, just before they start this contact with the entity, Jeff brings a thermometer along with him. Even though initially there was not much that happened in response to their invitation, at some point, all of a sudden, the temperature of the room drops, and they notice that change in the thermometer. And then, suddenly, the whole power in the building blows out. Complete blackout. At this point, Jeff uses the flash in his camera, and he takes a photo of the room. When Jeff develops this photo and it comes out, he sees that in one of the photos, in a corner, he can see a whitish skeletal system of sorts. He can see the rib cage, the bones, and the pelvic bone. So it seems like a person who's standing in a corner, but it's like an X-ray. It's just a skeletal system that is sort of in a blurry whitish pop in the corner. Even though there is evidence now in that photograph, Chris's logical mind is embarrassed of admitting that he has been sleeping in common rooms for fear of a spiritual entity. Chris requests Jeff to keep this revelation of the ghostly entity to himself, to not share this information or this photograph with anyone else. But as it happens, Jeff does end up sharing it with some of his friends, and that news just spreads like wildfire among all of the students. Although some people are empathetic to him and they feel sorry for the experiences that Chris is having, but college kids being who they are, young and inexperienced, not all of them are able to extend sympathy to someone who is seeing ghostly apparitions. He earns the epithet of ghostly boy and people start to mock him and they start to tease him. This adds added stress to what he has already been going through. This ends up straining his relationship with Jeff. Now, in this episode, we see the filmmakers felt that it was important to share with us a little backstory to Jeff and to Linda. Because Jeff has been trying to solve this problem for Chris. He's been trying to understand what's going on with him. And Linda also, when everybody finds out and he's alone and he feels friendless, Linda comes up to him and he says, "No, I'm there for you." And she also tries to help him in this time of need. So we get a little backstory on the two people and why they're trying so hard to help Chris with the situation that he's dealing. We learn that both Jeff and Linda individually have had some traumatic experiences or brush with death at a very young age. We are told that in 1978, around the age of 15, Jeff was doing this part-time job of dropping newspapers to people's houses. He was a newspaper boy. One such morning, when he goes to drop a newspaper at someone's house, which was in a sort of slightly isolated area, he notices that someone is sitting in the car outside the house. So he goes to check out the house and he sees that the owner of the house is sitting inside the car and he is literally living his last breath. He catches this old man dying in his car. So at the age of 15, to witness someone giving out their last breath, that was a life-altering experience for him. That opened the door to his empathy for Chris's experience at present. Likewise, we are told that Linda also had something similar to share with Chris. She tells him about the time when a few years back she was in charge of a couple of younger girls and she was taking care of them during the camp. So one night there's lightning and thunderstorm, and so she asks the girls who are outside to go inside the cabins and to close the doors and to keep themselves safe. So as soon as two girls go inside one such cabin, that whole cabin catches fire because of lightning falling on it. And those two girls end up dying. She talks about how the nurse who came there for emergency rescue was giving CPR to one of the girls and she told Linda to give CPR to another girl. So they both are giving CPR to these girls, trying to save them. Unfortunately, both of these girls pass away. So this experience of watching someone die is just like Jeff had this experience of witnessing death unexpectedly. Linda too has this experience of witnessing death unexpectedly. So because both Jeff and Linda have had some backstory of opening this gate to the other side to life, they are now able to empathize with Chris's experiences and they hold his hand through this ordeal. At this point, we see that Jeff tries to repair his friendship with Chris. He apologizes to him and Chris accepts the apology. Jeff suggests that he do more research on the historical background of Geneseo and the area itself to find out what is there in history that can be connected to the present events, the present experiences that Chris is having. They both are reluctant to use words like ghost or spirit in public, So they decide to give it a name. Chris comes up with the name Tommy. Jeff suggests recording evidence of Tommy's presence so that they can get help for the experiences that Chris has been having. Jeff arranges with his roommate Craig to let Chris sleep in their room for one night, since he's been sleeping in the common room and he's not slept well at all. And surprisingly, Craig agrees. That night, when Chris is sleeping, he's sleeping on the floor that night. Even though he only gets to sleep on the floor, he's glad not to be sleeping in any common room, and he's glad to be having the company of these two friends. That night, he wakes up screaming from a dream where he feels like he's being dragged through the forest, where he goes running usually. We are told that Chris sees running as a form of therapy. He uses it to clear out his mind. He keeps himself sane by running regularly. So now he has this dream that he's being dragged through the forest where he usually goes running. After this incident, experiences with Tommy escalate. He starts encountering breezes, noises, moving objects, and sudden drop of room temperature more often. His end of the semester results come out, and the results are not great. Now, not only are his mental and physical health affected, but also his marks are dropping, and he needs to keep his marks up to a certain level so that he can continue to attend this college on the scholarship that he's entered. He's put on academic probation due to drop in grades. He's running in the forest one morning when he encounters the same entity that he and Paul had witnessed in their room. This becomes a final straw, and he realizes that he can't continue living like this, so he stops running in the forest alone. At this point, he's failing his classes. He's mentally and physically exhausted. He decides to seek refuge in Christ. He recalls that his mother is a devout Catholic and they grew up going to the church regularly. So he goes to meet with Father Charles Manning. We also see Father Charles Manning himself speaking in the interviews. When Chris goes to meet Father Charles Manning, he brings Jeff's journal around him because Jeff is used to taking a lot of notes and researching and keeping a record. So he shares Jeff's journal to Father Manning, and he explains his situation, his experiences to him. Now, initially, Father Manning is dismissive of his story, and he thinks that this is all nonsense. He doesn't believe in all of this. But as soon as Chris is dismissed by Charles Manning, that his experiences are not real, Chris bursts out crying. Now, seeing a young man, healthy, fit, and strong, sitting in front of him and crying, weeping like a little boy, he begins to realize that maybe there is some truth to what Chris is sharing. So just to be sure, he decides to check out Chris's room. He goes with Chris and he takes holy water with him and the book Pastoral Care of the Sick with him. There, he blesses the room with holy water and prays from the pastoral care of the sick. After that, everything sort of becomes quiet and the room feels lighter. It is no longer cold because even Father Manning mentions the room was extraordinarily cold. So that was something that was very strange that he noticed. But once the prayer was done, the room was warmer, the air felt lighter, and everything was pleasant. After that, for quite some time, there were no issues. It was as if the whole problem had been solved and Chris was just living his life peacefully. One night, Chris and Jeff make plans to hang out at Beth's room. Beth goes out to change her outfit and they keep waiting for her and she doesn't come. So they get a little worried thinking, why is she not here? So they go to check out her room to see if she's all right. And there they see that she's lying on the floor catatonic. When she comes out of the stupor, she looks straight at Chris and she says, "It kept calling out your name." We now reach episode 3. The timing is winter break 1984. We are shown an empty college and there is a janitor working alone. He ends up seeing Tommy and has a scary experience with him. We are then taken to July 1984, where Linda has a direct experience with Tommy. She feels like someone is pressing her down in the bed and she screams and people come running. We have actual photos of Linda in a position where it looks like she's being pressed down by something. There are 3 photos that are taken by Jeff. We are shown Linda's expression when she sees that photo now. She's a much older lady now. Looking back at those photos, she still feels overwhelmed and she's uncomfortable seeing those photos because it brings back memories. At this point, Chris is overwhelmed by guilt because not only was he experiencing this thing, he felt as though he had unleashed it now on his friends ever since the prayer had happened. Because not only had the janitor witnessed something strange, but also Beth and Linda. So he goes to run in the forest to clear his head. When he gets back, he gets in the shower, and there he feels as though someone is attacking him from behind and pressing him to the wall. He struggles and he falls with the shower curtain wrapped around him. And when Jeff comes to see if he's all right, he notices that there are 3 deep, long scratches on Chris's back. The only kind of a loophole here is that they have not shown us photos that Jeff had taken of the scratches. And it seems a little strange because for everything else, we see Jeff with a camera. But this one thing where he could have captured the evidence as proof that Tommy is real, that this whole saga is real, somehow we have no evidence of these photographs. So that was something that I thought was kind of a hole in the plot, which the series does not address. At this point, Chris is feeling absolutely helpless, so then he decides to reveal the truth to his father. He tells his father about all of this. His father is in disbelief because he's not the type of man who would involve himself in these kind of stories. But he has to trust his son, so he decides to come and meet him in college. There, in his room, he decides to spend a night with his son. His son is sleeping in the bunker. He's sitting down in the chair. He says, "You go to sleep peacefully. I'm there. I'll take care of things. Nothing will happen to you. And just you see, you wake up in the morning and this whole thing will be behind you." He's very confident that his son was probably confused about something and that this whole thing is fake. Everything is fine until 3 a.m. when suddenly the whole room becomes a little bit colder. Then around 3:30 to 3:45, he says that he feels a strange pain, fear, and nausea. But at the same time, he's aware that this is not his pain, fear, or nausea. It is someone else's pain, fear, and nausea. It's as though he is feeling something, even while simultaneously being aware that this is not his feeling. Now, this strange experience really shakes him up. So he is very, very bothered. He felt this urge to protect himself and his son from something that was there in the room. So there was a strange experience that even his tough, strong father experienced. That morning, he goes running with Chris into the forest. There, they both stumble upon the Parker Boyd plaque. Simultaneously, as these people are running and they're trying to clear their mind, we are told that Jeff has been all this time researching the history of Erie Hall. He wants to discover if maybe there was a suicide or some other tragic incident which has left this entity or spirit or ghost roaming around the halls. So they, along with Jeff, discovered that this Parker Boyd plaque has a context with the Revolutionary War. During the Revolutionary War, a lot of soldiers had died in the area. Lieutenant Thomas Boyd is the character that matters in this story. Thomas had been instructed to conduct a reconnaissance of a Native American tribe of Seneca, located just out of Geneseo. He defied orders and took a much larger group with him. The group were ambushed by Native American tribes, and Thomas was singled out for extensive torture. He was tortured and murdered near Torture Tree, which is around 1 mile away from his campus. And this tree is the one where Chris crossed this tree regularly whenever he went running. So it was a tree that he crossed every time he went running. And this tree is responsible for all the experiences that he's been having so far. And this tree gained the epithet of Torture Tree specifically because of Thomas's murder, where he underwent extensive amount of torture and cruelty before his body was dumped near the tree. Turns out Thomas was reaching out to Chris for absolution. He was looking for somebody to acknowledge the pain and torture he had experienced. On April 11, 1985, Jeff and others decided to communicate with Thomas. Craig encourages Chris to just face this thing and get it over with, rather than feel bullied by this presence. He finds the courage to walk to the torture tree and ask Thomas Boyd to reveal himself to him. Tommy, or Thomas, does appear, and Chris tells him that he is forgiven. But he also is emphatic that this cannot continue, that he cannot keep pursuing Chris this way. He tells Thomas that he needs to go. After this, Thomas stops hunting Chris. Thomas disappears because he finds his release. It is revealed to us as a final piece of the puzzle that Adam Hubley, one of the ancestors from his mother's side, was the one to have found Thomas Boyd's body near the torture tree. And years later, generations later, his spirit had come to Chris for absolution. The second story is The House That Murdered Me, and this unfolds in two parts, episode 4 and episode 5. This story revolves around April Miller and her husband Matt. She's living with her two sons, Shane and Nate. Nate is the older son, Shane is the younger son. Central to this story are Shane and his experiences with a spirit, a little boy that sort of roams around with him, and eventually Matt and April as well. Nate does appear, but he appears briefly. And in the interviews, Nate doesn't appear at all. We only see adult Shane and Matt and his wife April. This story covers the time period from March 2004 to August 2006. This story is set in and around Salt Lake City. April Miller is from a very strict Mormon family, and ironically, she ends up becoming a single mother at 16. She ends up leaving her church because the people in her church are judgmental of her becoming a single mother and of her decision to keep the child. She doesn't want to abort it, so she goes ahead and she has Nate. And a few years later, she has Shane. She begins living as a single mother in a trailer in West Valley. A few years later, she meets Matt, and they both move in together to a location 25 minutes away from Salt Lake City in West Jordan. Now, in this house, there is once an incident where an intruder breaks into their home. And even though Matt is able to fend off the intruder, April begins to feel really, really uncomfortable in this house. It's just the memories of the intruder keep coming back, and she wants to move out. One of the areas there, the avenues, is an upscale area where it's very difficult to have an opening for a house on sale. But as luck would have it, one day when Matt is driving around in that area, he notices a for sale board outside of a house. And this house is a beautiful Victorian house. He talks to April Miller about this, and he says that they should go and check out the house. From the outside, even though the house is really beautiful, it looks a bit run down and it is covered in ivy. So Matt is immediately thinking of the amount of work that will need to go in before this house becomes livable. April is worried that they may not be able to afford the house, but then Matt comforts her that because the house is not in top shape, he might be able to cut a deal. As luck would have it, he is able to lock down a price that is within their own range. There's one red flag in all of this. On the day when he comes to check out the house with April, he notices that there is graffiti on the wall which is being covered with paint by the owner. So he goes to check it out to see what's written on the wall. But before that, the owner just closes the door and he says, no, it's nothing, don't worry about it. It's just, children scribbling on the walls, and he shoos him away. Eventually, they are able to buy the house. Once the house becomes their own, they move in there. So on the first day when they move in, everybody is really excited. The boys run out into the backyard. Matt goes down into the basement to check it out. Meanwhile, April goes to the bedrooms upstairs to check out the bedrooms. She notices an old clawfoot bathtub in one of the bathrooms. She immediately dislikes it and she decides that this has to go. That night, they stay up until 1 or 2 in the night, excited about the prospect of living in this beautiful house. Then they fall asleep. As they are sleeping, April is awoken by a soft whisper, "Mommy, Mommy." Now, April wakes up and she's worried and she's looking around. There's no one there. And she wakes up Matt. And suddenly they hear loud banging noises coming from the basement. It's as if someone is feeding the boiler in the basement. But here's the catch. The boiler in the basement is dysfunctional and it hasn't worked in years. Matt becomes very worried. He tells April to stay inside the room. He takes a baseball bat and he goes to check out if there's an intruder there. He keeps hearing weird clanging loud noises as if the boiler is functioning, but the moment he reaches the basement, there's nothing there. The sounds sort of stop. One day while cleaning the house, April looks out of the window and she sees that Shane is swinging on a tire swing from a tree. She keeps hearing him say, "Higher, higher." So she assumes that her older son Nate is pushing Shane on the swing, and that's who Shane is talking to. But when she goes down to check it out, she becomes worried that the swing is swinging too high, and she wants to tell Nate to stop pushing his brother so high. She goes down to check it out, and she sees that actually Shane is swinging by himself. As soon as he sees his mother, he stops the swing, he gets down, and he says, "Mom, Benjamin is pushing the swing." And there is no one there. We are then taken from this dramatized moment onto the real Shane being interviewed. In the interview, at this moment, when he recalls this incident, he's completely overwhelmed with emotions. The adult Shane, the real Shane, tells us in the interview that no matter where he went in the house, he always felt that there was this presence hovering around his shoulder. And that this energy or entity started to become more friendly with him as time went on. He started to think of Benjamin as a friend. He doesn't recall ever inviting him or asking him where he's from. Since he always found him around his own house, he just assumed that this boy just walked over from the neighborhood, and he never considered the possibility of asking him where he's coming from. Matt had heard Shane mentioning Benjamin, and he just assumed that Benjamin was some kid from the neighborhood. While Matt is clearing the house of the ivy, he finds that one of the rooms has a window which has a false wall from the inside the house, and it is sealed off. So when you're inside the house, you can't see that there's a window. But from the outside, when they're clearing the ivy, they find a window. So he decides to knock down that false wall and to extend that room into a nice closet for April. Remember I told you about the bathtub that April had noticed on the first day? She had wanted that removed. So Matt gets to work on that. He arranges for a couple of guys to come and remove that bathtub. And he goes off to work. He comes back in the evening. He notices that the bathtub is still there. So he calls up the guys and he asks why it has not been removed. So they say that whenever these guys tried to lift it and carry it away, it felt like it had water and it was heavy and they couldn't carry it out. Because they were not able to remove the bathtub, they were willing to return the money to Matt. Now Matt was on his own. He decided that he will put this on the back burner and come back to the bathtub issue later. As Matt is fixing the house around, he begins to realize that everything in the house is either rotten or needs to be replaced. Matt was beginning to feel like this house is against him. He would finish repairs on one thing and then he would discover that there is great repairs left with another thing. So it was this never-ending chain of work which was soaking in all of his money and savings. To cope with the expenses, April gets a job with an adult dating service as a receptionist. At this job, she starts to make in one day what she was making in a week in the previous job. So all of the money that was coming from this job was very useful in the repairs of the house. Even though her Mormon upbringing was giving her qualms about the job that she had taken up, she rationalized it as her giving the best lifestyle that she can for her children. One strange thing was happening when she was heading out to work. Every morning, she would find that her keys are missing and she would be searching. And then Shane would walk up to her, hand over the keys and say that Benjamin had kept it safe for her. And she didn't pay it much notice to this. She was just caught up in her own everyday activities. Around this time, April and Matt's relationship began to suffer. Because before this, April was a stay-at-home mom. Meanwhile, Matt was bringing in the livelihood. Now the roles had reversed. He would stay at home and do the repairs, meanwhile she was out there making money. So this role reversal was affecting their parenting also. Earlier she was fully present for the kids, and now he had to take on that responsibility. At night, Shane started to have nightmares every night. He would wake up screaming because he was having incidents and experiences. And unfortunately, Matt kept on dismissing these concerns and putting him back to sleep. So he was beginning to get tired because he was not getting proper sleep at night. Meanwhile, April was under constant camera surveillance at work, so she couldn't even make phone calls at home to check if the kids were all right. So at this point, this role reversal was straining all of them. The kids were not getting the attention that they deserve. Matt was not able to handle the parenting responsibility as well as he should. And April was also miserable at work. The biggest victim in all of this was Shane, because his concerns were constantly dismissed by both of his parents. Now, in the interviews in the present, they both admit to feeling extremely guilty for not listening to Shane. So that is something that resurfaces over and over again. One night, Matt has his longtime friends, Jody and Shane, visit him at home. So when they come home, they notice two things. One, that Matt looks extremely tired, and two, that the house that they're living in is extremely beautiful. They both wonder how this couple is able to afford this beautiful house. That night, all three of them witness a tall man wearing a hat and black coat appear and disappear into thin air in front of them in the gardens. Both Jody and Shane leave the house in shock. Meanwhile, Matt is mulling over what is it that he had witnessed. Matt becomes so agitated that he runs out of the house saying, "Leave us alone, leave our family alone." So at that point, he encounters a neighbor who comes to calm him down. When he turns around and he looks at the neighbor's face, he sees extreme sympathy and concern in the neighbor's face. The neighbor tries to calm him down and then he leaves. That night when April returns, she has some drinks and goes to the bathtub to have a bath. In the bath, she hears hissing noises and someone calling her worthless. Now she wonders if this word worthless is her own mind telling her things, or is it something that she heard. She's not sure what exactly happened because she also had alcohol in her system. So she blames it on that and she gets a little confused. When she brings it up with Matt, Matt blames her for drinking. So then there is a small fight and they both are really upset. In all of this, it is important to remember that Matt himself is a contractor. So he's able to do all of the household work by himself. Unless he needs more muscle, he's able to do everything on his own because he himself is a contractor. So they realize that this situation of April working and him staying at home is not working. They decide that they need to go back to the old style of him working and her staying at home. So before that complete switch can happen, Matt gets an offer to do a contractor job out of town. So he has to go for a few days. Meanwhile, April has to take care of the kids at home. So April decides that she can't stop working until Matt gets like a proper income and he gets steady work. So because they're in that transition phase, she decides that she will call her mother to take care of the children while she is at work. Her mother comes home and at night she decides to sleep in Shane's room. She feels a little uncomfortable being in his room, so she prays to God and then she goes to sleep. She is sleeping in a mattress beside Shane's bed. At night, she feels a man grabbing her legs and dragging her towards the closet. Now, the closet is the one that has been giving this little boy Shane nightmares. So now, when the grandmother gets dragged from her mattress by the feet towards the closet and left, that's when she realizes this whole thing is real because it's like physically attacking her. So in the morning at around 5:30 a.m., April returns. This is the point where the episode 4 ends. We begin episode 5 with April returning in the morning at around 5:30 a.m. She says that she got out of the car and she saw that every single light in the house was on. So she gets concerned because at 5:30 a.m. to have the whole house, the lights on, she goes in concerned thinking what has happened. And she notices that her mother is sitting outside Shane's bedroom. The mattress has been dragged outside of the room and Shane is sleeping on the mattress right next to her mother, and her mother is looking very concerned, and she's sitting near her grandson taking care of him. She tells April about the experience that she had, and she tells them that she's not going to leave the grandchildren alone at home, and she takes both Nate and Shane with her to live until they sort out the whole house situation. At this point, because she's living without her children, April decides that she should try and do something to cleanse the house. So she goes back to her Book of Mormon, and she picks out prayer from that, and she learns from Google search that you can sage your house to cleanse the house. So then we have this funny shot of him sort of using, we have this funny shot of Matt using the blower to sage the whole house. So he's there, he says, like, I'm like a Ghostbuster out there, using the blower to sage the whole house. So after that, the atmosphere in the house starts to feel lighter. And so they assume that the problem is solved. And then they tell her mother to come and drop the kids back at home. So the grandmother comes and she does drop her grandchildren at the doorstep, but she refuses to go inside. And she's like, are you sure that it's safe for the children to be here? And April convinces her, saying that, yeah, I've done everything. I've prayed using our Book of Mormon, and I have saged the house. And now the house feels brighter and lighter and everything, and we haven't had any incidents. After this, in a few days, Matt is in the basement when he feels that someone is stepping on his chest. He finds himself on the floor and someone's stepping on his chest, and he feels immense pleasure, and a male voice says, quit messing with it, boy. At this point, he can smell cigar smell and leather. This incident really shakes Matt. He decides that he has to find out about the history of the house. So he goes to the house of the neighbor who checked on him at that night when he came running out of the house. So he goes to him and he asks him what happened. So that neighbor says that he feels great sympathy and he feels sorry to see him in the state, because he has seen the previous owner, David, also go through the same kind of experience. When he moved into the house, his life was ahead of him. He was married and he was excited to live in that house. But the moment he moved into the house, his whole life went down the drain. His marriage broke up. His wife left him and he committed suicide. And it was him who had written that graffiti on the wall. The graffiti said, "This house murdered me." A few days after that, they're sleeping, and there's a small voice that comes and wakes up April. There's a voice that April hears. It says, "Mommy, mommy, he's coming." So then April gets scared and she wakes up Matt, and they both encounter the tall man in the hat. They all get really scared. They run out of the house. They don't even lock the house. They grab the kids, they get into the car, and they are out on the roads, and they drive to a motel to live. So for the next few months, they're living at a motel. This couple hears about Jeremy and Bill Spencer, who are paranormal investigators, to come and check out their house. They invite them to stay over for a couple of days and do a full investigation. So on 14th October, they move into the house, and he says that over multiple months, they stayed in that house for about 15 to 20 days. And in that time, nothing much happened. There was no physical activity that happened, but they did catch voice recordings. A recording that was sent to Matt in April by Jeremy and Bill said, "Hey, mommy," and it is the same voice that had woken up April multiple times. So now it is confirmed that it's not something that April is imagining or that any of them is seeing on their own. Additionally, they also grab evidence of one of the windows in the house opening and closing on its own. They in fact show us that real footage that was captured by Bill and Jeremy. So after this, April is wondering how to deal with this, because they can't keep living in the motel. At some point, they have to move out of it, because it was not a safe neighborhood also, like as a family, to keep living in a motel room. In April 2006, she gets in touch with this clairvoyant called Debbie. So Debbie comes to the house, she does an investigation. When Debbie is investigating the house, she comes across the name William. She doesn't hear anything about David. She had come searching for David because that's all they knew about. So when she got the name of William, they did some research. April went and she looked at the land records of the previous owners. So then they find out there was this man called William that lived there, and his wife Ruth had killed herself in the bathtub, where April had heard these strange voices and noises. So the story goes that his wife killed herself because she was being abused by her husband, and the husband was not only abusing her but also his 4 kids. So there is a practice among the Mormons that at the age of 8 you have to confess your sins in front of a priest before you can get baptized. The father did not want his secret of abuse to be revealed to his society. So before the children reached the age of 8, he decided to kill them. So he killed that one boy who would keep appearing, Benjamin. At the age of 8, he threw him into the furnace and set him on fire. And he killed that child because at the age of 8, he would have to get baptized and he would confess. And he wanted to do the same thing to the other kids as well. So I think this is the point at which Ruth killed herself. So because of this negative experience that the house had, these energies were trapped there, and they were the ones that were causing all this negativity. So then Debbie does a prayer and she pushes William out of the house, and she releases the other spirits who are caught there to go towards the light so that this house can be cleansed. And after that, this house is cleansed. So after this, Matt and April make sure that this house is ready for sale. They make sure that there's no other negative incident there. After it has been fully cleansed and properly ready for next family to come in, they sell the house and they get out. We find out that they were so traumatized by this experience, they have not been able to live in any other house for a long time with any history of people having lived there before. So unless it's in a brand new house, they can't really live there. So they have adopted a very nomadic lifestyle. Ever since the incident happened, they've moved 8 times because they just couldn't bring themselves to live in the same place for too long. And now for the review. This series presents to us 2 stories of real experiences of haunting. It presents a dramatized version of events, interspersed with interviews with those who experienced these events firsthand. This proved to be both a positive and a negative. It is positive in that we get their natural reactions on screen. Their reactions to these past events, retold even decades later, makes the stories feel real. We gain more empathy for their trauma by witnessing them struggle to revisit these painful memories. The same strategy of making the story come alive, however, turns negative by breaking the flow of narrative while we are watching the episodes. It feels like a blend of a regular show with a reality show. The effect is somewhat jarring because we keep switching from the flow of one narrative style to another. Ultimately, all the pieces come together to provide a multidimensional perspective to an otherwise linear storytelling. The cast is exceptional. The actors bear very strong resemblance to the real people narrating the stories. We also get access to their actual photographs and videos from the time these stories are placed in. This helps flesh out the narrative, and it almost feels like we are sitting with a group of our friends who are sharing their experiences with us. This style of storytelling breaks the fourth wall, even while engaging us with movie-style dramatization of events. As the people being dramatized share their stories, we get a larger context of the impact these experiences had on these people over a period of time. They all are immensely affected and altered by these experiences of haunting. Their relationship to understanding the afterlife, our own fleeting presence in this life, seems to have contributed to their personal growth as in the first story, and family trauma as in the second story. While Chris and his friends seem to have grown from these experiences and integrated the lessons it taught them into how they move through life with more maturity, April, Matt, and Shane seem to have been so negatively impacted that they can't bring themselves to live in any house that has any history of its own. Chris and his friends also see these events as a permanent part of who they are, but seem to have accepted it as something that helped them view the world a little differently. There is simply too much pain in Shane seeing a now grown man tear up thinking of his childhood experiences when he felt abandoned by his family, when they didn't believe him initially. It feels uncomfortable as an audience, as though you're witnessing something that you should not be seeing. It is difficult to tear away his image of him as a child every time he speaks, because he talks with vulnerability of a small boy reliving his horror, not as an adult who has moved past his pain. Stylistically, it reflects the time period these stories are set in, 1980s and the early 2000s, with accurate costumes and settings. Cinematography is good enough to help you immerse yourself in the stories. Episode 3 of Eerie Hall ends with a brilliant shot of Geneseo and the forest Thomas Boyd was found in, blending into a connected landscape, which now Chris feels is inseparable from who he is. The second story intersperses the presentation with the frame moving between actual actors and settings to various rooms in a dollhouse. The transitions between the two are smooth and give us an interesting way to cut away from one part of the story to the next. It was emotional intelligence on the part of the director to include the dollhouse because that's how April sees her dream life in that house initially, as her childhood dream of living in a dollhouse coming to life when her family gets the opportunity to own this beautiful house. The image of the dollhouse underlines the poignancy of the ordeal that they underwent instead of the fairy tale they had imagined naively. Watching this series starts off as yet another adventure you want to take with James Wan because of his excellent filmmaking credentials. However, by the time we are done watching all 5 episodes, all we are left with are stories of these people who grow on us with their intimate portrayal of their true hauntings. I give this series a 4 out of a 5. Totally worth your watch if you're not just looking for cheap thrills, but for human stories touched by the supernatural.